Hi everybody. I'm making a walnut tart this afternoon and I suddenly thought this would be a great time to show you how to make pastry, how to line the pie tin and also how to bake blind. Okay, so firstly the flour. Now for this sort of recipe I'm using plain flour. Of course you can also buy something called high grade flour. Some people say, well, what's the difference? Well, the main difference, it's the high grade there, the main difference is the protein content. The plain flour has a lower protein content, and protein from the flour, when it's mixed with some liquid, forms gluten, which is that sticky, stretchy substance which gives us structure. So therefore the high grade flour is best for making bread because it's got that higher protein content. For things that we want to be tender, crispy, perhaps we use what we call plain flour. Sometimes it's called standard flour or some other names. In other countries they actually are a bit more sensible about it and they call it cake flour or bread flour or so on. Sometimes it's also called the plain flour is called soft flour and the high grade flour is called hard flour. So that gives you a bit of a tip about the uses of it. So today it's plain flour, lower protein content. And I'm using my trusty Cuisinart food processor, which I've had for about 25 years. It's never given me a moment of trouble. It's a really good, strong motor, so it does does every job I've ever asked for it to do. Flour's going in there. My only food processor before this one, it actually flung itself to the ground in exasperation when I asked it to do something that it was a bit too hard for it. But this one just goes really, really well. So flour in there, pinch of salt, and I'm using unsalted butter. Okay, it doesn't have to be unsalted, but it gives us more control over the amount of salt that's in the pastry. This has been cut into little cubes and chilled, well chilled. So that's all going in there. New Zealanders are pretty used to using salted butter. So really, we're probably used to that slightly salty flavour. Okay, your butter is blended. You don't want any big chunks for this sort of pastry. You want it pretty well blended. So I'm just checking that and it looks pretty good. So then I'm going to add some water. 3 to 4 tablespoons for this amount, but don't add it all at once because with that gluten, the more liquid you put in with your pastry, the more it's going to be activated and it's going to give it that tough, stretchy, chewy kind of texture that we don't want in this pastry. So turn your processor on, chilled water from the fridge and just a tablespoon at a time. So a couple to start with and see how it goes. Generally when it's starting to clump together you'll hear a different sound and you know that the pastry mixture is coming together. I can see that it's starting to add a little bit. So just perhaps half of that at the moment. Can you hear the difference in the sound? Starting to, as you can see, come a little bit. Actually that feels pretty good because it's all holding together. You don't want it to be too dry because then when you roll it out it's going to be a bit crumbly and so on. We're going to chill it now for about half an hour. The reason for that is that in this mixing some of those gluten strands may have been developed to become a little bit stretchy and been stretched, and so the chilling is going to allow those gluten strands to relax again. If you don't do that then we're going to have trouble when the pastry is cooked because it's going to shrink, being stretched out, and then when it cooks it shrinks back again. Okay, so I've rolled my pastry out. One of the things you'll find if you bring it straight from the fridge and start to try rolling it out, because it's quite cold, it starts to crack around the edges a little bit. So just take your time, pinch those edges back together again, and just gradually let it warm up a little bit so that you can roll it out more easily. Use a minimum amount of flour on your board or whatever you're using. I find these silicone sheets just fantastic for rolling out. You've got the sizes there as well. And the minimum amount of flour on your rolling pin. My treasured rolling pin that used to belong to my grandmother. Okay, flan tin. This one I've had for a pretty long time, about as long as I've had my food processor probably. It's a good quality one, heavy, it doesn't buckle, and you can tell that the base is pretty solid. It's a thick metal, it's not going to bend or go out of shape. Looks a little bit battered, but I have used it a lot. Now I like to spray the inside of my flan tin with some of the cooking spray, but if you don't have that, just some melted butter with a pastry brush, and that just stops your pastry sticking. Alright, so how do we get this into the pastry case? Right, this is where these sheets are actually really useful as well. So bring the pastry up over your rolling pin. Don't try this with one of those rolling pins that are on a swivel, because you lift it up like that and the next thing it's rolled off. So just gradually bring it over. You can always adjust it later, and also the thing is, if something breaks or cracks, you know, don't worry, it can be patched together, because this is going to have a filling on top of it, so no one's going to notice if there's been patches and so on. So just gradually ease it into your tin. You would have noticed that this pastry doesn't have any sugar in it. That's because the filling is quite a sweet one with honey and sugar, and so this acts as a bit of a counterbalance to the sweetness of the filling. So it's just a short pastry with the butter and the flour and water. No eggs either. So pressing it right round like that, you can see I've got it right into the edges, and then I'm just going to trim that on the edge like so. Keep these little bits, don't throw them away straight away, because sometimes when you bake the shell you might get a little hole or a crack in the bottom, and you can use that then to patch it. So just trim like that. That's gone pretty well, and a few light pricks with a fork, not too hard. Don't try not to go right through, because that makes holes, and then you're going to allow your filling to go through. Now this has to be chilled again for another 20 minutes or so. Same reason again, in that rolling out we might have stretched those gluten strands a bit too much, and so let them relax a little bit so that when we bake it, the pastry is not going to shrink away from the sides. Hopefully it won't too much. Fridge for about 20 minutes, and meanwhile I'll reheat my oven. Now what I did before I turned it on, I put an oven tray in the oven. I don't know if you can see that, but that means that when I put the tart in there, it's on a hot base, and that's going to help the bottom of the tart to cook really, really well. Right, so my tart shell has now been chilled for around 20 minutes in the fridge, and I'm going to line it with a piece of greaseproof paper, like that. And then I'm going to put some pastry beads or ceramic beads inside. Just to weight, the reason for that is to weight the pastry down so that when it's cooking it doesn't bubble up and spoil the shape of the tart. So something like that. So I'm going to pop this as, you don't have these sort of ceramic beads, you can use other things like beans, macaroni, rice, anything that you can use to weight that pastry down. And I have seen a suggestion recently of using white sugar, and the advantage of that is that each time you use it, the sugar becomes a little bit more caramelized, and you have a really lovely toasty flavored sugar at the end of the times you've been using it. Now, the filling recipe comes from the Rick Stein book, French Odyssey, and in that he credits the recipe to Stephanie Alexander, who found the recipe or devised it when she was travelling in the southwest of France. So it's a recipe from that kind of area. So it uses pieces of walnuts, just chunks broken up. If they're a bit big, just break them with your finger. In a saucepan I have had some butter melting. I don't want it to be warm, so I've let it it's melted but it's not warm. So we're going to add some cream. Some honey. Now the easy way to do that is put it onto your scales and zero it. So rather than having to measure it out and get all your other utensils sticky, to zero, 150 grams. Now I'm using a lovely clover honey today. I mean you could obviously use the Manuka honey, but I quite like the flavour of the clover honey. Out. Here we go. And as I said, that actually works really, really well because there's no honey there. It can be just the lid put on again, and you haven't got any sticky spoons and things to deal with. So just whisk that together, and you'll find the warmth of the butter, which wasn't terribly warm at all, but that will soften the honey enough. And then into that a couple of tablespoons. The recipe says rum, but I've decided today to use something perhaps not quite so distinctive, and I'm using some Cointreau. Just 2 tablespoons into there. And then we have 5 egg yolks. Some of you will say, oh my god, what am I going to do with the 5 egg whites? Well, what you do is freeze them, and that's what I've got here. Label them 5 egg whites so you know, and then if you need to use them, or you want to make a pavlova or meringues or friands is another one that's really good. Then you've got them there, they just need to be thawed out overnight in the fridge and they're ready to go. Okay, my egg yolks go in here now. Just whisk it all around, and then that gets added to the walnuts and it's ready to put into the tart when it's cooked. So whisk that together. I'm not doing it too fast because the honey to the, that's it, and with the walnuts and sugar. And that's basically the filling. So now we just have to wait for the pastry tart shell to finish cooking. About 20 minutes with the pastry ceramic weights in it, and then probably another 5 or 10 minutes afterwards. So it's quite a runny bit of a mix. I'm going to show you another little trick too once that tart shell comes out of the oven, just to prevent getting soggy bottom. Hi, so my tart's baked now. Firstly I baked it for about 20 minutes with the ceramic beads in, then I removed them and cooked them for another 10 minutes or so. Now this is just one more little trick to help you prevent the pastry going soggy when it's got the tart filling in it. So some of those egg whites that you had left over, just give them a little bit of the egg white. Just give it a little bit of whisk and paint that on the inside of the pastry with a pastry brush. And because it's hot from the oven, it's going to set straight away. And that just makes a little bit of a barrier to prevent any liquid going into the pastry and then making it soggy. So that's pretty well set. I'll Just give your filling another bit of a stir and in we go. Just try to distribute the nuts a little bit. Yeah, see better there. And the last bit of liquid, the honey and egg. And now this goes into the oven again for around 40 minutes. Just turn your oven down a little bit too from the pastry cooking, which was about 200. Now it should be about 190. And then we'll see it again when it comes out of the oven in about 40 minutes. Okay, so it's out of the oven and you can see how it's all caramelized around the edges and quite bubbly. It's just set. If I just give it a little wobble, you can see it's just set. And it's very, very hot, so it needs to cool down now, and then when it's quite cool, we'll take it out of the flan ring. The tart is cooled down enough now to take it out of the flan tin, so just use a little knife like this to go around some of the little places where you can see the filling has escaped over the edge and that it might have stuck. So just check all that, just like that, just a little pointed knife. And then next trick, just use something like an upturned bowl to put your flan on top of. And then that comes off like that, and now we can slide it onto a flat plate. Use your spatula and voila, there we are, all ready to serve.